Blessings, friends, and welcome to this online worship service with Shiloh United Methodist Church for March 14th, 2021, the fourth Sunday in Lent. We are so glad that you have chosen to join us for this worship experience today. My name is Mike Hammett. I'm the pastor here at Shiloh, and I am assisted in the production of this service by David Watson, our Director of Music Ministries and pianist, who is across the way from me in Mission Control, where he has all the computers and knobs and equipment and bells and whistles to make this event possible. Thank you, David, for all that you do week in and week out. If you have opportunity to come and worship at Shiloh in person, we worship on Sunday mornings at 11 o'clock. We are still practicing masking, hand sanitizing, and social distancing at this time as we continue to be cautious and careful as we see good statistics about our pandemic. But we are still respectful of one another as we care. And so we are cautious as we worship, but we do have a wonderful time in worship. You're more than welcome to join us in person or always through this online service. And just a reminder that this online worship experience will be continuing even after the pandemic situation has been gotten under control, because we've discovered that many of you are too far away to be able to worship with us in person on any regularity, but you do worship regularly with us online. So we're really appreciative of that, and we're going to be continuing this worship opportunity for you. I hope you have a candle present with you as we have ours here. I'm going to now light this candle and ask you to light yours as well. The lighting of the candle reminds us that the light of Christ is in our midst. The light of Christ unites us, even though miles may separate us, and the light of Christ is shining forth. May we all be the light of Christ for the world around us. I invite you now to sit back and let music transport you to the realms of glory as we hear the wonderful hymn, "To God Be the Glory." Please join me in a moment of prayer. Lord, as we gather for this worship time together, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing and acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Our first reading from Scripture today comes from the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, reading Psalm 103, verses 1 through 8. We are told that this is one of those psalms attributed to David. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits, who forgives all your iniquities, who heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from destruction, who crowns you with loving kindness and tender mercies, who satisfies your mouth with good things, so that your youth is renewed like the eagles. May God bless this reading from God's holy word. I thought I'd share with you today some interesting statistics about the Bible. We know that the Bible is divided up into the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Scriptures, and the New Testament. There are 929 chapters in the Old Testament, 187 chapters in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, 249 chapters in the historical books, 243 chapters in the poetic or wisdom books, 183 chapters in the major prophets, and 67 chapters in the minor prophets. And when we turn now to the New Testament, there are 260 chapters in the New Testament. 89 chapters in the Gospels that tell us the life of Jesus, 28 chapters in Acts, which is the history of the early church, and the acts of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit in the midst, 87 chapters in the Pauline epistles written by Paul, excluding the book of Hebrews, 34 chapters in what are called the general epistles, which will include the book of Hebrews, and 22 chapters in the book of Revelation. I will point out that there are far more chapters in the Old Testament, 929, than there are chapters in the New Testament, 260. And yet, most pastors, myself included, tend far more to preach from the New Testament than the Old. It gives us time to pause and consider and wonder if we need to be spending a little higher percentage of our time looking at some of those Old Testament stories. So this gives us a total of 1,189 chapters in the Bible. On average, 18 chapters per book. Some books are longer, some books are shorter. So if you made the decision to read 1 chapter a day from the Bible, some days your reading would be shorter because you'd have a short chapter. Some days your reading would be longer because you'd have a longer chapter. But it would take you 3 years and 3 months to read the Bible through completely, reading 1 chapter a day. So when we think about these reading plans that tell us that we can read the Bible through in 1 year, you're going to be doing quite a bit more reading. And if you've never tried to read the Bible through in a year, I would suggest you try it. It's a challenging experience, but it will give you the entire panorama of the Holy Scriptures. Now, some other statistics that I find interesting. The book of Psalms contains both the shortest chapter in the Bible and the longest chapter of the Bible. Psalm 117 is the shortest chapter. It's also the middle chapter of the Bible, being the 595th chapter. And Psalm 119 is the longest chapter in the Bible. But here's where all of this has been leading. The first 2 verses of Psalm 103, which we just read together, are the 1,551st and 1,552nd verses. They are the middle verses of the Holy Bible. So, in the middle of the Bible, the verses that are smack in the middle are these words: Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. I think it's beautiful that those words comprise the middle of our Holy Scriptures. I invite you now to again allow music to speak to your heart as we hear a hymn that is so classic and yet always so right. Amazing Grace. We continue today on the path, gaining wisdom for life from the book of Proverbs. And today we're going to focus on the idea of getting help along the way, getting help along the path, along life's journey. And Proverbs 15:22 is the key verse that we're using. We'll be hearing some others as well. Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, said, "Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed." Have you ever made some choices in your life that turned out not to be so good? For instance, when you're a parent, we knew nothing about parenting until the day our first child was born. You may have read books, you may have taken classes, you may have heard people speak, but you don't really know anything about it till you're in the middle of it. If you've ever done any investing, you've probably made a mistake or two. What you didn't know was that might cost you hundreds or even thousands of dollars. If you're a veteran, on that day you reported to basic training, how could you have known that you knew nothing until your drill instructor so politely demonstrated your ignorance to you? We're learning these days about a very important formula, and that is that our direction determines our destination. Getting from point A to point B involves more than hopes or dreams. It involves a path. We've learned that life needs to be a series of mid-course corrections, that when we see danger, we need to be prudent and make a mid-course correction to avoid it, not just ignore it. We want to take refuge and avoid the dangers. And we've learned that a common mistake in determining which fork to take is trusting our hearts, because sometimes our hearts aren't always the best way to make a decision, because our hearts will pretty much help us to figure out how to do what we want, not necessarily what's best. And today, we want to continue learning about the path. And this has to do with figuring out what you don't know. Now, how do you know what you don't know? How do you discover what you don't know that you don't know so that you avoid the potholes and pitfalls and landmines you never saw coming? Well, Solomon gave us some counsel in Proverbs 15:22, which I read for you a moment ago, and I'll read it again. Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. So how can you know what you don't know? You seek advice from others. Specifically, you seek the right advice from the right persons. Now, why do we not seek advice? Why do we sometimes make really important decisions on our own without checking with other people about it? Well, number one is sometimes we think we already know what we need to know. We're kind of ignorant, actually. We think we have knowledge, but we don't really. And sometimes it's because it feels better to have people think we know where we're going and what we're doing than to let them know that we really don't have a clue. In other words, pride gets in the way. So sometimes it's ignorance, sometimes it's pride, and then sometimes it's just too much work to figure out how to get advice. It's laziness. The Bible calls this a wonderful word that we don't use very much called slothfulness. It's a word we don't use much, but it's really very descriptive. Slothfulness. You're just a slug and you're not moving very much, not exerting much energy at all. So sometimes we make plans without counsel, and these often fail or at least wind up being less effective than they could be. And then sometimes we get counsel, but we get inferior counsel because we take it from the wrong people. So why is it that we seek advice from the wrong people sometimes? Well, it's easier to get advice from our friends. It's easier to follow the herd. It's easier to just copy what our parents did, or to read a self-help book, or look it up on the internet, or ask people on social media what they believe. Those aren't usually good choices. The average person, and that's most all of us, will borrow a page or two from someone who's never been where we want to be. So you get young parents who parent just like their parents did and then wonder why their kids are turning out just like them. Or couples who treat each other the way they saw their moms and dads interact and then wonder why they're unhappy in their lives, just like their parents were. People have a good idea of where they want to be and do and go, but they're content to follow a map used by folks who've never been there. You know, your friends are great for friendship, but they aren't always great for advice giving. Many times their advice will just get us into trouble. It's kind of the herd assumption. The herd assumption is when we assume that since everybody's doing it, it must be all right. So if everybody we know is mortgaged to the hilt, driving 2 leased vehicles, and having to apply for a home equity line of credit because they don't have enough money to meet their needs, then it can't be all bad because we're all doing it. No, that's not right, of course. And if everyone you know works 60 hours a week and sees their families a little bit on the weekends, then it must work out somehow. And we know, of course, no, that's not right. The problem is that everybody's headed for a similar destination at which no one has yet arrived. It feels safe. Everyone can't be wrong. But yes, everyone can be wrong. Taking your cues from people who share your season of life is equivalent to asking for and following the directions of someone who's never been where you want to go. So, what is the secret to good advice, good counsel on our path, and where do we find it? Well, again, Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, in the book of Proverbs, tells us in Proverbs chapter 1, verse 5. Solomon writes, "Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance." Wise people listen to counsel and get wiser. Discerning people listen to guidance and get further along their path. So what are some secrets to getting good counsel, good advice along your path? Number one is knowing that you'll always need that. We never get to the place where we cannot receive wise counsel from others. The other day, I heard a story about a guy that was working inside a small eatery on the East Coast a few years ago when President and Mrs. George W. Bush came in during one of their times away from the White House. So Mrs. Bush said to the president, "Well, what kind of sandwich do you want?" And W said, "I don't know." And the server at that point said, "I became a presidential advisor." He suggested the president order the pastrami on rye, hold the mayo. He did, and he loved it. You see, even presidents need advisors. The first secret to getting good counsel is to be open to it. Wise people listen and add to their learning. A second thing about getting good counsel is you need to ask more than one person's advice. Proverbs 11:14 says, "For lack of guidance a nation falls, but many advisors make victory sure." How many advisors? Many. Not one, many. Now here's something that's going to seem obvious, but we just need to think about it. Most of our really important decisions in our life just seem really important, don't they? They seem to have a sense of urgency to them. They're so important that they dominate our thinking. They're with us all of our time, so we want to make those decisions as quickly as possible. But remember, many advisors make victory sure. So when a decision is important, ask for advice. Ask your spouse. Ask a trusted friend. Ask a pastor. Ask someone older than yourself who's had the experiences. The third secret to getting good counsel is to not let pride keep us from admitting what we don't know. Proverbs 13:10 says, "Pride only breeds quarrels, but wisdom is found in those who take advice." Pride may be the number one enemy of success on our path in life. Successful people are open to the fact that they don't know everything they need to know, and they're quick to go to people who do have knowledge. Solomon described it this way in Proverbs 12:15. "The way of a fool seems right to him, but a wise man listens to advice." So a friend comes to you and says, "I'm worried about some direction you're headed," and a fool says, "Well, you don't need to worry about me." But a wise person says, "Really? I'm so grateful that you care. Tell me what you're seeing." A dad comes to a son and says, "I'm worried about some of these habits you're developing." The foolish son will say, and haven't we heard this or said it ourselves, "Leave me alone, Dad." A wise son says, "Well, tell me what you're seeing." A mom goes to the daughter and says, "Honey, I think your behavior could get you into trouble someday." That foolish daughter, and haven't you said it perhaps, or heard it said, "Mom, you're just old-fashioned." But the wise child will say, "Tell me what you're seeing." Your supervisor comes to an employee and says, "I know this is none of my business, but can I give you some advice?" The foolish employee says, "If it's none of your business, then mind your own business." The wise employee says, "Please, I need all the advice and counsel I can get." There's a powerful biblical story that illustrates this. It's about a young king named Rehoboam. The story is found in 2 Chronicles chapter 10. Picking up at verse 5, we read about Rehoboam, who has just become king, and the people feel like they had been worked unduly hard by his predecessor, who was his father. So before they allow him to be crowned as king, they ask him to lighten up on his demands for their labor. This request is made, and in verse 5, Rehoboam answers, "Come back to me in 3 days." So the people went away. Then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon during his lifetime. "How would you advise me to answer these people?" he asked. They replied, "If you will be kind to these people and please them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants." But Rehoboam rejected the advice the elders gave him and consulted the young men who had grown up with him and were serving him. He asked them, "What is your advice? How should we answer these people who say to me, 'Lighten the yoke your father put on us'?" The young men who had grown up with him replied, "Tell the people who have said to you, 'Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter,' tell them, 'My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions." So 3 days later, Jeroboam and all the people returned to Rehoboam. As the king had said, "Come back to me in 3 days." The king answered them harshly. Rejecting the advice of the elders, he followed the advice of the young men and said, "My father made your yoke heavy. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions." So the king did not listen to the people, for this turn of events was from God, to fulfill the word the Lord had spoken to Jeroboam, son of Nebat, through Ahijah the Shilonite. Picking up at verse 16, when all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, they answered the king, "What share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, O Israel, look after your own house, O David." So all the Israelites went home. But for the Israelites who were living in the towns of Judah, Rehoboam still ruled over them. But it was not a very good rule, because it says in verse 18, King Rehoboam sent out Adoniram, who was in charge of forced labor, but the Israelites stoned him to death. King Rehoboam, however, managed to get into his chariot and escape to Jerusalem. So Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. What do we see in this story from the scriptures? Well, after hearing this request, Rehoboam actually did 3 good things. He asked for time to decide what to do. He was wise enough to know that this was not a time for a rushed decision. The second thing he did that was actually smart was to seek advice in making the decision. He chose to listen before he decided. And the third thing he did was he listened to many counselors, not just one, and not even just one group. But unfortunately, although he made those 3 good decisions, Rehoboam was not interested in actual advice. What he wanted was confirmation of his own decision. So the reason he went to 2 different groups for advice was that the first group didn't tell him what he wanted to hear. Never mind that these men were older and wiser. Never mind that they had been there to help make his father the wisest and richest king of his day. Never mind that they had actually gone where Rehoboam wanted to go. And so he ended up with a people angry and in rebellion. Another thing we can do to have good counsel is to take counsel from those who have been where we want to go. You remember, your life and mine are on paths. Paths will either lead us toward where we want to go or away from where we want to go. The secret to getting good counsel is knowing that you need it, then seeking it from multiple sources and really listening to learn what you didn't even know you didn't know. Taking counsel from the right people, from people we respect who have arrived where we want to go with their character and reputations intact. There's a difference between a right road and an easy road. The easy road is an ignorant way. It doesn't seek counsel. It ignores the counsel it gets, or it seeks counsel only from those who are easy to get it from. A wise person seeks counsel from wise people. They listen to it, they heed it, and they walk a path that leads to where they want to go. Imagine for a moment what our lives would be like if we developed the habit not of being impulsive in our decision-making or of being indecisive, but of consulting older, wiser, more successful people than you. Parents, imagine the heartaches that could be saved with raising children or grandchildren or even great-grandchildren if we consulted with successful, seasoned parents. Students, imagine how much better you'd be able to enter the work world if you would link up from time to time with older, successful people whom you admire and ask for their advice on how to study, how to approach your homework, what classes to take, what college or graduate school that you might attend. Employees, imagine the steps you could save if you sought advice from people of character and success in your field, and asked for guidance once in a while. And for those of you listening who are retirees, and I know there's a number of you out there, you may be one of those successful, seasoned people who've been there, whom others may ask for your advice. I hope you'll be prepared to give it. So, what is our takeaway from this message? What's the one thing I want you to remember if you remember nothing else? And it's this: learn to listen and listen to learn. Let me repeat that. Learn to listen and listen to learn. We don't listen well in our modern world. Part of the problem is we're bombarded with way too many stimuli, so that it's hard to listen because there's so many things out there that we could be listening to. But part of the problem also is that as we're listening, most of us are trying to decide how we're going to answer, how we're going to refute, how we're going to rebuttal, how we're going to one-up somebody. Can we learn to listen and to say thank you for sharing that? I appreciate your insight. I had not seen that before. Thank you. And as we learn to listen, then we can listen to learn. I had a number of different persons whom I learned to listen to as a younger minister. I just want to share 3 of them with you today. One was, and all 3 were ministers in the Methodist Church. One was Carol Cotton Wynn. Carol was the first woman district superintendent of the Louisiana Conference of the United Methodist Church. And I happened to be serving in the Lake Charles district where she was assigned as the first woman DS. Carol and her family and myself and my family became more than just professional colleagues. We became friends, visiting in one another's homes, sharing meals together, helping watch one another's kids whom were similar in age. And it was a really great relationship. It was probably the closest relationship I had ever had at that point with a clerical colleague. And it was helpful because Carol was a few years older than I was and had had some different experiences than I had had. And so it was a really good opportunity, and Carol challenged me to develop professionally, to really polish the edges and make myself shine as a clergy person and to strive after excellence. And I guess that I did a fairly good job of that, because later when she was the district superintendent of the New Orleans district, she called on me to serve a church that had been through a troubled spot and needed someone to come in and help get back on their feet. And I had 6 wonderful years as pastor of that particular congregation in a suburb of New Orleans. The next person, very different than Carol Cotton Wynn, was a man named Paul Durbin. Paul, when I met him, was the director of pastoral care at Methodist Hospital in New Orleans. If you wanted to hear Paul's formal title, it was Chaplain Brigadier General Paul G. Durbin, United States Army retired. Paul had begun as an Army chaplain during the Vietnam era and retired as a 1-star general on the staff of the Chief of Chaplains for the United States Army. Paul was a very insightful man. Paul was a man who studied deeply the human nature and the human psyche. And I learned some really good skills of pastoral care and caring for people in other ways as well, therapeutically speaking. Paul challenged me to know myself deeply, to plumb the depths of who I was and what was really going on inside of me. A different kind of man with a little rougher edges perhaps than Carol had had, but yet still a wonderful colleague and a great counselor and mentor. And the third person I want to mention, and he was totally different than the other 2, was Jim Wilson. Jim was Jim. was how he'd be described for those that knew him in the Louisiana Conference. Jim had spent almost his entire ministry in campus ministry on college campuses, and most of it at one particular college in northeast Louisiana. And he had built a wonderful campus ministry there and had influenced literally thousands of students in their spiritual life. Jim was one of those left-wing radical type clergy. He was out there. And I did not agree with everything he espoused, and he didn't agree with me on mine. But Jim's friendship challenged me to push the margins a little bit, to think about some things that maybe I normally would not have thought of. And friends, while you may not always agree with what you think about, it can be helpful to explore those margins. So the takeaway for today is to learn to listen and listen to learn. And I hope that you have some mentors and counselors, some persons in your own life, like these three I have shared, who have had an impact on your life and on your journey. Because all of us are on our path, and we want to be successful in traveling upon that path. May God bless us as we journey on the path. Let us pray. Lord, as we journey upon the path, help us to know that our direction determines our destination. Help us to remember that we may need to make course corrections and be prudent as we see needs arise. And help us to know that our hearts matter, being open and receptive to your guidance, and that we can seek and need to seek counsel from others in our decisions along the path. And it's in your name we pray. Amen. Now we're going to come to a time of pastoral prayer as we think about the needs of others and of ourselves. This is a time that I want to pray a prayer that helps us to lift up and honor and worship our God and give thanks for all the blessings we've experienced, as well as praying for the needs of others. And at one point, I'll give you opportunity to lift up in silence to our God those persons whom you have in your prayer life, or perhaps yourself. So let us go now in prayer. Let us bow our hearts in prayer. Father everlasting, Jesus, our crucified and risen Savior and Lord, Holy Spirit, our constant comforter, you are our triune God. You are the everlasting one. We believe in you. In this moment of worship, we gather as your created and redeemed image bearers, your beloved bride, the church, with our minds focused on you and our hearts adoring you. With unity of spirit, we trust you at all times. In these days that can be disruptive and turbulent and uncertain, we cling to you. Though we may find ourselves in uncharted territory, we know that you, our sovereign God, will be with us and guide us. O Lord, how great you are. You are our refuge and our strength, a very present help in times of trouble. You are our good shepherd. In you there is no lack. You lead us to green pastures and beside still waters. You restore our anxious and weary souls. Even in the darkest valleys we do not fear, for you are here with us, always attentive to us, always providing and guiding us. You watch behind us and you go before us. We find safety, comfort, peace, and joy in your omnipotent and loving hands. We cast our cares on you, for you care for us. For nothing can separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. We are mindful of those who have needs around us, and even of the needs of ourselves. And so now, in this moment of silence, each of us lifts up in our hearts those needs of others or of our own lives before you. Oh God, in each and every situation, may you touch and bless and comfort and strengthen and heal. May your healing spirit flow into each of us and through us to others. As a congregation, we pray that you would protect and provide for each of us in the ever-changing and sometimes difficult days before us. Help us to joyfully be your eyes and ears and hands and feet to each other and to our neighbors. And, O Lord, help us now to pray the prayer that you taught your followers to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Throughout our services of Lent, we've been using the wonderful hymn, I Surrender All, as our theme. Hear it now as we begin to bring this service to a close. As this service draws to a close, we extinguish the candle in our midst, but never extinguishing the light of Christ within us. And now receive this prayer of blessing as we depart from this time. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May God give to you his peace in your going out and in your coming in your lying down and in your rising up, in your labor and in your leisure, in your laughter and in your tears, until you come to stand before Jesus in that day in which there is no sunset and no dawning. Amen.